I stared at the notification on my phone, heart pounding as the words, "Acquisition complete. Summit Tech, now under Horizon Partners management," flashed across the screen. The name of my ex-husband, Logan Mitchell, appeared in the article, noting his removal as CEO. I felt a rush of emotions flood through me, vindication, pride, and an unexpected touch of melancholy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 10 years earlier, Logan had laughed when I suggested investing our savings in emerging tech companies. "Stick to what you know, Melissa," he'd said dismissively. "You're just a housewife playing with spreadsheets. Leave the real business to those of us who understand it." Those words had cut deeper than the divorce papers he served me months later. He left me with almost nothing, a meager settlement that barely covered 6 months of rent. He thought I would crumble, that I'd come crawling back, begging for help. He never imagined that one day my investment firm would acquire his failing company in a unanimous board decision that he couldn't block. As I scrolled through the official press release, I couldn't help but smile. The woman he had dismissed as just a housewife now controlled the very empire he had sacrificed our marriage to build. It wasn't just about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction. This was about proving something to myself, that I was always more than the box he tried to put me in. I met Logan during my final year of business school. He was charming, ambitious, and full of big ideas about disrupting the tech industry. I was equally ambitious, graduating with honors and multiple job offers from prestigious firms. We seemed perfectly matched, two driven individuals ready to take on the world. We married a year later in a small ceremony on the coast. Those early days were magical. We would stay up late dreaming about our future, sketching business ideas on napkins, and challenging each other intellectually. We promised to build our careers together, supporting each other's aspirations equally. "We'll be partners in everything," Logan had said, holding my hand under the stars on our honeymoon. "Your success is my success." For the first 3 years, that seemed true. I took a position at a venture capital firm while Logan worked at developing his startup, Summit Tech. We both put in long hours, and I often helped him refine his business pitches and financial projections. When he finally secured his first round of funding, we celebrated together, knowing both of us had contributed to making it happen. Everything changed when I became pregnant with our daughter, Grace. The pregnancy was difficult, with complications that required me to step back from work temporarily. Logan's company was gaining momentum, and his hours grew longer as my world became increasingly centered on our home. "It's just for now," I told myself as I switched to part-time consulting. "Once the baby is older, I'll get back to my career." But Logan had other ideas. After Grace was born, whenever I brought up returning to work full-time, he would find ways to discourage me. "The company needs me right now, Melissa. We can't both be working these kinds of hours with a baby at home," he would say. "Besides, you're so good with Grace. She needs her mother." What started as temporary became our new normal. Summit Tech grew rapidly, and so did Logan's ego. He began to treat me less like a partner and more like an employee, someone whose job was to manage his home life so he could focus on more important things. The intellectual discussions that had once been the foundation of our relationship disappeared, replaced by his monologues about his achievements and connections. 6 years into our marriage, I decided to put my financial expertise to use by managing our personal investments. I spent months researching emerging technologies and market trends while Grace was at preschool. I created detailed analyses and projections, identifying several promising opportunities that I believed could yield significant returns. Excited to share my findings with Logan, I prepared a presentation one evening after Grace was asleep. I spread the documents across our dining room table, eager to reconnect with him on an intellectual level and contribute to our financial future. I've been analyzing some investment opportunities, I began, pulling up charts on my laptop. There's a pattern in these emerging tech companies that suggests. Logan barely glanced at my work before cutting me off with a laugh. Melissa, what is this? Playing stockbroker now? He flipped through my carefully prepared analyses with casual disregard. This isn't a game, you know. These decisions require actual business experience. I felt my cheeks burn. I have an MBA and worked in venture capital for 3 years, Logan. This isn't me playing at anything. His expression softened into something worse than dismissal. Pity. That was a long time ago. The market has changed. You've been out of the loop, focused on other things. Being home with our daughter doesn't mean my brain stopped working. I countered, trying to keep my voice steady. Logan sighed, checking his watch. Look, I appreciate the effort. But let's be realistic. You're just a housewife now. A good one, and that's important. But leave the investment decisions to me. I do this every day. He gathered his things and headed to his home office, leaving my research scattered across the table. I have a board presentation tomorrow. Can you make sure my blue suit is pressed? That night, lying awake beside him, I realized how far we had drifted. The partnership we had promised each other had become something else entirely, a hierarchy where my value was measured by how well I supported his ambitions while surrendering my own. For months afterward, I tried to revive our relationship. I suggested couples therapy, planned date nights, and attempted to engage Logan in conversations about our future together. But Summit Tech was consuming him, transforming him into someone who saw relationships as transactions and people as assets, or liabilities. I don't have time for this right now, became his standard response to any issue I raised. The company needs me. The breaking point came at a dinner party with his investors and board members. I had spent hours preparing our home, cooking an elaborate meal, and making sure everything was perfect to support Logan's business relationships. During dinner, one of the investors asked about my background. Melissa has a brilliant financial mind, the investor's wife commented after I explained a current market trend. You should have her take a look at your company's investment strategy, Logan. Before I could respond, Logan laughed loudly, placing his hand on mine in what appeared affectionate but felt controlling. Melissa's too busy managing our home to worry about investment strategies, he said with a dismissive smile. She's just a housewife these days, and an excellent one. I couldn't do what I do without her support. The table nodded appreciatively at his apparent gratitude, but I felt invisible. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up alone, Logan had retreated to make important calls. I found myself staring at my reflection in a serving platter, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. 3 weeks later, Logan came home late and announced he wanted a divorce. Summit Tech was preparing for a major expansion, and he had reconnected with Bree, his company's new marketing director. We've grown apart, Melissa, he said, as if stating a simple fact. You want different things than I do. Bree understands the demands of my position. She's in the trenches with me every day. The divorce was swift and brutal. Logan's lawyers painted me as a supported spouse who had chosen to leave the workforce. Despite my contributions to his early success and the years spent managing our household, the settlement was minimal. Logan kept the house, most of our assets, and arranged a visitation schedule for Grace that worked around his business calendar. You'll be fine, he said as I signed the final papers, handing me a check that wouldn't even cover a year's expenses. You're smart. You'll figure something out. As I walked out of the lawyer's office that day, carrying a box of personal items, and that insulting check, something inside me shifted. The hurt and betrayal began to crystallize into something harder, more determined. I wasn't just a housewife. I never had been. And Logan Mitchell was about to learn exactly what I was capable of. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first month after the divorce was the hardest. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, a stark contrast to the 5-bedroom house Logan and I had shared. On the nights when Grace stayed with me, we made it an adventure, building pillow forts in the living room and pretending we were explorers in a new land. But when she returned to Logan's, the silence was deafening. "Mommy, why is Daddy's house so much bigger?" Grace asked innocently after one weekend. She was only 7, too young to understand the complexities of divorce settlements and asset division. "Different houses are good for different things," I told her, keeping my voice light. "Our apartment is just the right size for cozy movie nights and making memories." But after tucking her into bed that night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table and faced the brutal reality of my situation. The settlement money would run out quickly. I needed to rebuild my career after an 8-year gap in an industry that moved at lightning speed. Logan had kept all our social connections, most of whom were tied to Summit Tech. And worst of all, I had lost confidence in myself. For a week, I allowed myself to grieve. For my marriage. For the years I'd spent supporting Logan's dreams at the expense of my own. For the woman I used to be. I scrolled through social media, watching Logan and Bree attend industry events. Their smiles a painful reminder of how quickly I'd been replaced, both personally and professionally. Then one morning, I came across an article about Summit Tech's latest acquisition, a promising startup that I had actually included in my investment. Research, the very research Logan had mocked. According to the article, the acquisition was expected to boost Summit's portfolio considerably, exactly as I had projected. I stared at my screen, a strange feeling washing over me. It wasn't just anger or resentment, it was validation. I had been right. Despite being out of the industry for years, my analysis had been spot on. Logan had dismissed my insights, yet here he was, profiting from the very opportunity I had identified. That was the moment everything changed. I closed my social media apps, opened a fresh document on my laptop, and began to write. Not a letter to Logan or a journal entry to vent my frustrations, but a business plan. If my investment instincts were still sharp enough to identify valuable acquisitions, then perhaps they were sharp enough to build something new. I started researching the current venture capital landscape, analyzing how it had evolved since I'd left. I identified gaps in the market, underserved niches that larger firms were overlooking. Using the settlement money as seed capital might be risky with Grace to consider, but playing it safe hadn't exactly worked in my favor so far. For the next 3 months, I lived on a strict budget. When Grace was with Logan, I worked around the clock, reconnecting with old colleagues from business school, taking online courses to update my skills, and refining my business concept. I targeted a specific niche, tech companies with promising innovations that were being overlooked due to being led by non-traditional founders, women, minorities, older entrepreneurs who didn't fit the typical Silicon Valley mold. My first major obstacle was finding investors willing to back me. My resume showed an 8-year gap, and when I mentioned I was recently divorced, I could see potential partners making assumptions about my emotional stability and commitment. After 15 rejections, I changed my approach. Rather than seeking large sums from established venture capitalists, I reached out to successful women entrepreneurs who might understand both my vision and my journey. I created detailed analyses of overlooked investment opportunities, demonstrating the untapped potential that my firm would target. Leah Thompson, founder of a successful biotech company, was the first to take a meeting with me. She had faced similar skepticism when starting her company as a single mother in her 40s. "Your analysis is impressive," she said, reviewing my presentation. "But what makes you think you can compete with established firms after being out of the game so long?" It was the question everyone had been dancing around, finally stated plainly. I appreciated her directness. "Because I've been watching from the outside," I replied. "I've seen how groupthink leads to missed opportunities, How firms overlook founders who don't fit their preconceived notions of success. I've experienced firsthand what it means to be underestimated, and I know how to recognize potential in places others don't bother to look. Leah studied me for a long moment before nodding. I'll invest on one condition. You bring in at least 2 other strategic partners. I need to know this isn't just about proving something to your ex-husband. Her words stung because they hit close to home. Was this about Logan? Partly, I had to admit. But it was about so much more, about reclaiming my identity, creating something meaningful, and hopefully changing an industry that too often overlooked talent that didn't fit the established mold. This is about building something that should exist, I told her, whether Logan ever knows about it or not. With Leah's conditional commitment, I had credibility to approach others. Angel, a tech entrepreneur who had sold her security software company for millions, signed on next. Then came Paulo Rivera, an early investor in several successful apps who liked my focus on overlooked founders. Within 2 months, I had assembled a small but powerful group of backers who believed in my vision. Horizon Partners launched with modest capital, but a clear mission. We focused on companies with solid fundamentals that weren't getting attention from larger firms. Our first investment was in a healthcare technology platform developed by a team of former nurses, women in their 50s who understood patient care from the ground up, but had been repeatedly told they were too old to enter the tech space. When their platform was acquired by a major healthcare provider 18 months later, delivering a 300% return to our investors, Horizon Partners suddenly had industry attention. My phone started ringing with calls from people who had previously declined meetings. 3 years after the divorce, Horizon had grown from my kitchen table operation to a boutique investment firm with a small but dedicated team working from our downtown office. We had a reputation for spotting unconventional talent and a track record of successful investments. I was finally rebuilding my professional identity, piece by piece. Grace, now 10, often visited the office after school. She had her own small desk where she would do homework while I finished work. I told Dad about your company, she mentioned, casually one afternoon. He said it sounds interesting. My heart skipped a beat. Did he? What else did he say? Grace shrugged, focused on her math worksheet. Not much. He seemed surprised, though. Bree asked if you had investors, or if it was just a small thing you were doing on your own. I smiled, turning back to my computer. And what did you tell them? I said, "You're the boss, and you have meetings all day with important people," she replied proudly, "and that you let me have the good chair when I visit." That night, after Grace was asleep, I found myself looking up Summit Tech online. The company had continued to grow under Logan's leadership. They had made several more acquisitions, expanded internationally, and according to industry news, were preparing for a potential IPO within the next year. Logan's professional success didn't bother me as much as it once might have. I was building something of my own now, something that reflected my values and vision. Still, a small part of me wondered if he ever thought about how quickly he had written me off, how confidently he had labeled me just a housewife, as if those years at home had erased my intelligence and potential. 5 years after the divorce, Horizon Partners had established itself as a respected player in the venture capital world. We had expanded our focus beyond early-stage investments to include growth-stage companies with proven concepts ready to scale. Our fund had grown significantly, allowing us to take larger positions in the companies we believed in. I was reviewing potential new investments when Thomas, our head of research, knocked on my office door. "You need to see this," he said, placing a file on my desk. "Summit Tech is facing some serious challenges." I opened the folder to find a comprehensive analysis of Logan's company. After years of aggressive expansion, Summit had taken on significant debt. Several of their recent acquisitions weren't performing as projected, and there were rumors that the planned IPO had been postponed indefinitely. Their stock, which had been trading on private markets, had dropped nearly 40% in 6 months. Their board is divided on next steps, Thomas continued. Half want to restructure, cut costs, and stabilize. The other half, including your ex-husband, want to double down with more acquisitions to boost their portfolio before going public. I studied the numbers carefully, seeing the precarious position Summit was in. Logan's strategy had always been aggressive growth at all costs. It had served him well during the tech boom, but the market was shifting toward profitability and sustainable growth models. Why are you showing me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Thomas smiled, slightly. Their largest investor is looking to exit. They're quietly shopping their 26% stake. It wouldn't give us control, but it would make us the largest single shareholder, enough to influence the board's direction. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing with possibilities. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being in a position to even consider such a move. Now it was actually within reach. Get me everything you can on Summit's current situation, I said. Board composition, debt structure, employee retention rates, client satisfaction metrics, the works, and find out what price the investor is looking for. As Thomas left my office, I turned to the window, watching the city skyline as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows between buildings. I wasn't interested in revenge. That emotion had faded years ago as I built Horizon. But there was something poetic about potentially saving the company Logan had built, using the very financial acumen he had dismissed. Would I move forward with this? I wasn't sure yet. But for the first time since the divorce, I felt the playing field between Logan and me leveling out. And it felt good to have options. Options I had created for myself by refusing to accept the limitations he had tried to place on me. That evening, as I helped Grace with her science project, my phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. Investor willing to discuss terms. Meeting set for next week. I set my phone down, smiling to myself as I turned back to my daughter. The woman Logan had dismissed as just a housewife was about to make the most important business decision of her career. And whatever I decided, it would be on my terms. The week before my meeting with Summit Tech's exiting investor, I barely slept. The potential acquisition consumed my thoughts. Each night after Grace went to bed, I pored over the research Thomas and our team had compiled, looking for angles I might have missed. Summit's financials told a clear story. Logan had prioritized expansion over sustainability. The company had acquired 17 smaller firms in just 4 years, taking on substantial debt with each purchase. While revenue had grown impressively, profits hadn't kept pace with the increasing debt service. It was a house of cards that had begun to wobble. "Are you okay, Mom?" Grace asked over breakfast one morning, studying my face with concern. "You look tired," I smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just some big decisions at work, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about Dad's company?" she asked, surprising me with her perceptiveness. At 12, she was becoming increasingly aware of the complexities in the adult world around her. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "What makes you ask that?" She shrugged, pushing her cereal around in her bowl. "I heard Dad arguing with Bree last night. He sounded stressed about work stuff." A pang of worry shot through me. Whatever my feelings about Logan, I never wanted Grace caught in the middle of business tensions on top of the normal challenges of having divorced parents. "Business can be stressful sometimes," I said carefully. "But that's for grown-ups to handle. You just focus on being 12, okay?" She nodded, but the concern lingered in her eyes. "If you helped Dad's company, would that make things better?" The innocent question struck me deeply. Grace wasn't asking about market share or return on investment. She was asking if I could fix something that was causing strain in her other home. For her, this wasn't about business strategy or personal vindication. It was about the people she loved. It's complicated, honey, I said finally. But I promise I'll think about what's best for everyone. That conversation stayed with me as I prepared for the meeting with Matthew Donovan, the investor looking to exit Summit Tech. His firm, Eagle Capital, had been Summit's first major backer, the one that had given Logan his big break when Summit was just a promising startup. Their decision to pull out now would be a significant blow, both financially and symbolically. Matthew was waiting when I arrived at the upscale restaurant where we'd arranged to meet. He rose to greet me, his expression revealing nothing. "Melissa." "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I must admit, when your name came up as a potential buyer, I was intrigued." We ordered drinks and made polite small talk until the waiter left us alone. Then Matthew leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from cordial to businesslike. "Let's not dance around this," he said. "You know why I'm selling, and I know your connection to Summit. The question is whether this is a business decision for you or something more personal." I met his gaze steadily. Would it matter if it were both? He considered this, swirling his scotch. "It might. I've been with Summit since the beginning. Logan Mitchell may have his flaws, but he built something valuable. I wouldn't want to see that destroyed out of spite." "Spite would be a poor investment. Strategy," I replied. "I'm interested in Summit because I see potential that's being squandered. The company has strong core assets, valuable intellectual property, and talented teams. What it lacks is prudent financial management and a sustainable growth model." Matthew studied me for a long moment. "You've done your homework." "I always do." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "Here's my situation. I need to liquidate this position to fund other commitments, but I'm not desperate enough to accept just any offer, and I won't trigger a fire sale that tanks the company's value." "What's your timeline?" I asked. 60 days, ideally. 90 at the outside. I took a sip of my drink, calculating. "And what about the right of first refusal clause in your investment agreement? Logan will fight to block any sale to me." Matthew smiled for the first time that evening. "That's where things get interesting. The clause expired during the last round of financing, an oversight in the new terms. Logan can't legally block a sale, though he'll certainly try to outbid you if he finds out you're the buyer. The revelation changed everything. If Logan couldn't block the sale, my primary obstacle was simply having the capital to make a competitive offer. Horizon had grown, substantially, but acquiring a 26% stake in Summit would require resources beyond what we currently had available. "I'm assuming you've had other inquiries," I said. "Several, but most are waiting to see if Summit resolves its current challenges before committing. You're the only one who seems eager to jump in now. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as problems," I replied. By the time we finished dinner, Matthew had given me a clear picture of his expectations. His asking price was high, but not unreasonable given Summit's underlying assets. He would give Horizon exclusive negotiating rights for 30 days, provided we could show proof of funds or committed financing. As I drove home that night, my mind was already working on how to structure the deal. Horizon would need partners. We couldn't do this alone, not without risking everything we'd built. But with the right consortium of investors, we could make a compelling offer. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my executive team. Thomas, Leah, and our CFO, Jack, gathered in the conference room as I laid out the opportunity. Summit Tech is vulnerable, but still valuable, I explained, pointing to the projections on the screen. With the right restructuring and a shift in strategy, we could not only recover our investment, but potentially double it within 3 years. Thomas looked skeptical. "That's assuming we can implement those changes. Even as the largest shareholder, we'd still be facing resistance from the current management, including your ex-husband." "He's right," Leah added. "Logan will fight any interference, especially from you. This could get messy, professionally and personally." I knew they were right to be concerned. This wasn't a typical acquisition target. The personal history complicated everything. I understand the risks, I said. But I also see an opportunity that aligns perfectly with our investment thesis. Summit has acquired some of the most innovative teams in the space, then burdened them with unrealistic growth targets and insufficient resources. We can liberate that talent, streamline operations, and build something more sustainable. Jack, who had been quietly reviewing the financials, finally spoke. The numbers support your analysis, but we'd need to raise significant capital. We'd be putting a lot of eggs in one basket. Which is why I'm proposing we form a consortium, I replied. Horizon would lead, but we'd bring in partners to distribute the risk and provide additional expertise. By the end of the meeting, we had agreed to move forward with exploring the acquisition. Jack would work on the financial modeling, Thomas would identify potential partners, and Leah would help me craft the strategic vision for Summit post-acquisition. Over the next 2 weeks, we approached several potential investors who had worked with Horizon in the past. Some were immediately interested, seeing the same potential we did. Others were hesitant, concerned about the company's debt load and the potential for a protracted battle with current management. Paulo Rivera, who had been one of my early backers, was particularly enthusiastic. I've been watching Summit for years, he said during our pitch meeting. Logan Mitchell built an impressive business, but he's been making increasingly risky bets. The company needs a new direction before it's too late. With Paulo's support and commitments from 4 other investors, we had secured enough funding to make a competitive offer. I called Matthew to arrange the final negotiation meeting. The night before the meeting, I found myself standing in Grace's doorway, watching her sleep. Whatever happened with Summit would impact her too. Logan was still her father, and his financial and professional stability mattered to her well-being. I needed to remember that, to make decisions that wouldn't unnecessarily harm him even as I pursued this opportunity. The next morning, as I prepared to leave for the meeting, Grace caught me at the door. "Good luck, Mom," she said, giving me a tight hug. "I know you'll do the right thing." Her faith in me was both comforting and terrifying. What was the right thing in this situation? Was I pursuing Summit because it truly represented the best investment opportunity for Horizon, or was I still trying to prove something to Logan and to myself? The question lingered as I drove to Eagle Capital's offices. Matthew was waiting with his legal team, his expression neutral as he greeted me. "Before we finalize anything," he said as we sat down, "there's something you should know. Logan called me yesterday. Somehow he's heard rumors about a potential sale." My heart sank. Does he know I'm the buyer? No, but he's scrambling to find funds to make a competing offer. He won't be able to match your price, but he's trying to leverage his position as founder and CEO to persuade our board that selling to him at a lower price is in the company's best interest. I nodded, absorbing this new information. "And what does your board think?" Matthew sighed. "They're divided. Some see Logan as the safer choice despite the lower offer. Others are purely focused on the financial return. And you?" "I'm focused on closing this deal quickly and cleanly," he replied. "But I need to be sure. You won't back out if things get complicated." I took a deep breath, thinking about Grace's words that morning. The right thing wasn't always the easiest path. Sometimes it meant making difficult choices with uncertain outcomes. "I won't back out," I said firmly, "but I want to be clear about something. My goal isn't to destroy Summit or to humiliate Logan. I want to preserve what's valuable about the company while correcting its course. That's best for everyone, the employees, the shareholders, and yes, even for Logan in the long run, though he may not see it that way." Matthew studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's move forward." 3 hours later, after intensive negotiations and multiple calls with our respective legal teams, we had a deal. Horizon Partners, along with our consortium, would acquire Eagle Capital's 26% stake in Summit Tech. The paperwork would be finalized within a week, and the transaction would be announced immediately afterward. As I drove back to the office, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and trepidation. After years of rebuilding my life and career from scratch, I was about to become the largest shareholder in the company that Logan had sacrificed our marriage to build. The woman he had dismissed as just a housewife now held the future of his company in her hands. But power, I was learning, came with its own responsibilities. The decisions I made in the coming months would affect hundreds of employees, numerous shareholders, and yes, Logan himself. This wasn't just about vindication anymore. It was about proving I could lead better than the man who thought I wasn't capable of leading at all. When I arrived at the office, Thomas was waiting with a grim expression. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately on alert. "Logan knows," he said. "Somehow he found out you're the buyer. He's calling an emergency board meeting to try to block the sale." The battle I had anticipated was beginning sooner than expected, but I was ready. This time, I wouldn't be the one underestimated. "How did he find out?" I asked Thomas, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through me. One of Eagle Capital's junior analysts let it slip during a due diligence call. Apparently, Logan went ballistic, started shouting about conflicts of interest and personal vendettas. I sank into my office chair, mind racing. This changed everything. The element of surprise had been our advantage, allowing us to move methodically while Logan remained unaware. Now we'd be facing active resistance every step of the way. "When is the emergency board meeting?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., Thomas replied. "Logan's trying to convince the board that your involvement represents a personal conflict that threatens the company." He's trying to trigger the hostile actor clause, I realized, referring to a common provision that allowed boards to block sales to entities deemed harmful to the company. But Eagle's shares are privately held. The board can't legally stop Matthew from selling to whomever he chooses. They can't stop the sale, but they can make the transition difficult. And they could potentially remove you as a shareholder later through a forced buyout if they can prove your actions are detrimental to the company. I nodded, understanding the strategy. If Logan could convince the board that my involvement was motivated by personal revenge rather than business sense, he might be able to neutralize my influence or even force me out eventually. "We need to get ahead of this," I said, reaching for my phone. "I'm calling Matthew." The conversation with Matthew was tense but productive. He confirmed that Logan had called him in a fury, threatening legal action and making various accusations about my motives. "I told him the deal is moving forward," Matthew assured me. "Legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on, but politically, he's making waves with the other board members." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Attend the board meeting," he said simply. "They've requested your presence anyway. Logan's counting on painting you as the vindictive ex-wife in absentia. Don't give him that opportunity." After hanging up, I called Leah. As one of my key investors and advisors, I needed her perspective. "It's a trap," she warned. "Logan wants to provoke you into saying or doing something that confirms his narrative." "I know," I agreed. "But if I don't show up, I look guilty or cowardly." "Then you go, but not alone," Leah insisted. "You bring your legal counsel and financial team. You keep it strictly business. No matter what he says, no matter how personal he gets, you stick to the numbers." The next morning, I dressed with careful consideration. A conservative navy suit that projected competence and stability, not aggression. Jack and our legal counsel, Angela, met me in the lobby of Summit Tech's headquarters. We reviewed our strategy one final time before heading up to the boardroom. The room fell silent as I entered. 10 board members sat around the massive conference table, with Logan at the head. Bree was there too, sitting slightly behind him with a tablet, presumably taking notes. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, but she quickly recovered her composure. Logan looked different than I remembered. More lines around his eyes, his posture rigid with tension. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Surprise? Respect? Fear? Perhaps a combination of all three. The board chair, a silver-haired man named Robert Wilson, cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, thank you for joining us on such short notice. I believe you know everyone here. I smiled politely. Thank you for accommodating me. Yes, I'm familiar with the board, though I haven't had the pleasure of meeting everyone personally. Logan didn't wait for further pleasantries. Let's cut to the chase, he said, his voice tight. Melissa, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? By buying into Summit? I could feel every eye in the room on me, measuring my response. This was the moment Logan hoped I would betray some personal motivation, some hint of revenge that would validate his narrative. I'm representing Horizon Partners and our investment consortium, I replied evenly, opening my portfolio. We see significant untapped value in Summit Tech. The company has acquired excellent properties and talent, but is currently over-leveraged and underperforming relative to its potential. Our analysis suggests that with strategic restructuring, Summit could significantly improve its profit margins and long-term stability. I proceeded to distribute copies of our analysis to each board member, including Logan. The report was comprehensive, detailing Summit's financial challenges and our proposed solutions, complete with projected outcomes under various scenarios. As you can see, I continued, our interest is purely financial. Summit represents an undervalued asset with strong growth potential under the right management approach. Logan's face darkened at the implication. Under the right management? Are you suggesting the current leadership is inadequate? I met his gaze directly. The numbers speak for themselves, Logan. Summit's debt-to-equity ratio has increased by 75% over the past 3 years. Your last 4 acquisitions have all missed their revenue targets. Meanwhile, your R&D spending has decreased by 1/3, jeopardizing your pipeline of new products. His jaw tightened. We're in an aggressive growth phase. Short-term metrics don't reflect our long-term strategy. Growth without profitability isn't sustainable, I countered. Your current trajectory puts Summit at risk of covenant violations on your loans within 18 months. One of the board members, an older woman I recognized as Dr. Helen Morgan, leaned forward. Ms. Bennett, these projections are concerning. Are you confident in these numbers? Absolutely, I replied. They're based on Summit's own quarterly reports and industry benchmarks. We've had 3 independent analysts verify them. Dr. Morgan turned to Logan. Is this accurate? Are we at risk of violating our loan covenants? Logan hesitated just a fraction too long. We have contingency plans in place. The situation isn't as dire as Ms. Bennett suggests. Another board member, who I hadn't met before, spoke up. I'd like to hear more about Horizon's restructuring proposal. What exactly would you change if you had influence over Summit's direction? For the next 45 minutes, I outlined our vision for Summit, focusing on consolidating the recent acquisitions, optimizing operations, reducing redundancies, and reinvesting in the company's most promising technologies. I emphasized retaining key talent and creating a more sustainable growth model that wouldn't require constant fundraising. Throughout my presentation, Logan interrupted repeatedly with objections and challenges, but I remained calm, addressing each point with data and reasoned analysis. I could sense the board's attention shifting, their skepticism giving way to genuine interest in our approach. This all sounds promising, Robert said when I finished, but it doesn't address the elephant in the room. Ms. Bennett, you and Mr. Mitchell have a personal history. How can the board be confident that your involvement won't introduce conflicts that might harm the company? It was the question I had been expecting, the one Logan had undoubtedly planted. From the corner of my eye, I could see him leaning forward slightly, waiting for my response. Mr. Wilson, I understand your concern, I said carefully. Yes, Logan and I were married. Yes, we have a daughter together, those facts aren't in dispute. But Horizon Partners has built its reputation on identifying undervalued companies and helping them reach their full potential. My personal history gives me insight into Summit's operations, but it doesn't dictate our investment strategy. I paused, glancing around the table. If I were motivated by personal feelings, there are far easier ways to express them than committing millions in investment capital to a complex corporate restructuring. A few board members nodded, and I continued. Moreover, our consortium includes respected investors like Paulo Rivera and Leah Thompson, who have their own reputations to protect. They wouldn't back this acquisition if they believed it was motivated by anything other than sound business principles. Logan stood abruptly. This is absurd. Melissa has no experience running a company of Summit's size. Her firm is a boutique operation that's barely 5 years old. She's trying to use our past relationship to gain control over something she couldn't build herself. The comment stung, echoing the dismissive attitude that had characterized the end of our marriage. But I remained composed, refusing to take the bait. Horizon Partners has delivered an average annual return of 27% to our investors, I replied, keeping my voice measured. We've successfully guided multiple companies through restructuring and growth phases. Our track record speaks for itself. Turned to address the entire board. I'm not here to relitigate my divorce or engage in personal disputes. I'm here because Summit Tech has tremendous potential that's currently being squandered by unsustainable practices. Either you address these issues now, with us as partners, or you'll be forced to address them later under far less favorable circumstances. The board chair called for a brief recess after that exchange. As people filed out of the room, Logan approached me, his expression tightly controlled. "Can we speak privately?" he asked. I glanced at Jack and Angela, who looked concerned. "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my team." Logan clenched his jaw but nodded. "Fine. What's your real game here, Melissa? What do you actually want?" "Exactly what I said in there," I replied. "Summit is a good company making bad decisions. We want to fix that and generate returns for our investors. So this has nothing to do with proving me wrong? With showing that you weren't just a housewife after all?" His tone was mocking, but I detected something else beneath it. A genuine curiosity, perhaps even a grudging respect. "Logan, not everything is about you," I said, surprising myself with the realization that I actually meant it. "This is business. Summit represents a good investment opportunity, provided certain changes are made. That's all." He studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. "You've changed." "We both have," I acknowledged. "It's been 7 years. Before he could respond, the board members began returning to the room. As Logan turned to walk away, he paused. "Grace told me your company is doing well. She's proud of you." The comment caught me off guard, a rare moment of genuine communication between us. "Thank you for telling me that." The remainder of the meeting was less confrontational, but no less intense. The board questioned me thoroughly about our plans for Summit, our financial capacity, and our long-term vision. I answered each query directly, keeping the focus on business fundamentals rather than personal history. By the time the meeting concluded, it was clear that Logan's attempt to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife had largely failed. Several board members expressed interest in further discussions about Horizon's restructuring proposals, regardless of the share purchase. As we gathered our materials to leave, Dr. Morgan approached me. "That was impressive, Ms. Bennett. I've sat on this board for 5 years, and I've never heard anyone challenge Logan so effectively on his growth strategy." "Thank you," I replied. "I hope the board will consider our perspective regardless of how the share purchase plays out." She smiled knowingly. "Oh, I think that's a foregone conclusion now. Matthew isn't going to back out of your deal, and after today's presentation, I doubt the rest of the board would want him to. You've made a compelling case." Outside the building, Jack and Angela were jubilant. "You destroyed him in there," Jack said admiringly as we walked to our cars. Did you see his face when you brought up the covenant violations? He never expected you to have that level of detail. We still have a long way to go, I cautioned, even as I felt a surge of satisfaction. The deal isn't closed yet, and even once it is, we'll be minority shareholders. Logan will fight us every step of the way. Angela shook her head. After today, I'm not so sure. Several of those board members seemed very receptive to your analysis. Logan's position isn't as secure as he thinks. As I drove back to the office, I replayed the meeting in my mind. It had gone better than I could have hoped, but something was nagging at me. The look in Logan's eyes when he mentioned Grace, a mixture of pride and regret, had stirred feelings I thought were long buried. For years, I had channeled my hurt and anger into building Horizon, proving to myself and eventually to Logan that I was more than the box he had put me in. Now, on the verge of achieving what once seemed impossible, I found myself wondering, what came next? If I succeeded in taking control of Summit, in reshaping the company Logan had built, what would it really mean? The question followed me back to the office, where my team was eagerly awaiting news of the meeting. As I shared the details with them, I felt a growing certainty that this acquisition wasn't the end of my journey, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. One that would be defined not by what Logan had once thought of me, but by what I chose. To build for myself, for Grace, and for all the people who had believed in me when I was still learning to believe in myself. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Our legal team worked around the clock to finalize the acquisition documents, while our financial analysts prepared detailed transition plans. Meanwhile, I juggled my regular responsibilities at Horizon with preparation for the challenges that would come once we officially became Summit's largest shareholder. Matthew called on a Wednesday afternoon with the news I had been waiting for. It's done, he said simply. The board approved the sale unanimously. Even Logan voted in favor, though I suspect that was more about saving face than genuine support. Thank you, Matthew, I replied, surprised by the unanimity. I hadn't expected the entire board to back the deal. Your presentation changed minds, he explained. Several members approached me afterward expressing confidence in your vision for Summit. They're tired of the constant financial tightrope walking. After hanging up, I sat quietly at my desk, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. 7 years ago, I had been a devastated divorcee with dwindling savings and a shattered sense of self-worth. Now, I controlled a significant stake in one of the industry's leading companies, the very company my ex-husband had prioritized over our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the victory felt different than I had imagined. There was satisfaction, certainly, but not the vindictive pleasure I might once have anticipated. Instead, I felt a weighty responsibility to the employees whose livelihoods now partially depended on my decisions, to the investors who had trusted my vision, and yes, even to Logan, whose life's work I now held influence over. The official announcement went out the next morning. Horizon Partners acquires 26% stake in Summit Tech, becomes largest shareholder. Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages from industry colleagues, journalists seeking comments, and friends offering congratulations. Grace called between classes, her voice excited. Mom, I just saw the news online. You own Dad's company. Now? Not exactly, sweetheart, I clarified. Horizon and our partners are the largest shareholders, but we don't own the entire company. Your dad is still the CEO. But you're his boss now, right? She pressed, the complexity of corporate governance lost on her 13-year-old mind. I chose my words carefully. It's more complicated than that. The board oversees the CEO, and as major shareholders, we have influence on the board. But this isn't about who's the boss. It's about making Summit a stronger company. There was a pause before she asked, Is Dad upset? The question was loaded with concern. Despite our differences, I never wanted Grace to feel caught between her parents' professional rivalry. Your dad and I have different ideas about running the business, I explained. But we both want what's best for Summit. And more importantly, we both want what's best for you. After promising to explain more when she came for the weekend, I ended the call and turned my attention to the next critical step. My first board meeting as Summit's largest shareholder. It was scheduled for the following Monday, and I knew it would set the tone for everything that followed. Over the weekend, I prepared meticulously, reviewing Summit's operations in even greater detail and refining my proposals for the changes I believed were necessary. Grace helped me rehearse my presentation, playing the role of skeptical board member with surprising effectiveness. You sound like Dad when you do that, I laughed after one particularly pointed question. She grinned. I've been to his office a lot. The way he talks to people there is different than at home. The observation was innocent but revealing. Grace had been watching both her parents navigate their professional worlds, absorbing lessons from each of us. I wondered what she was learning from this latest chapter in our complicated story. Monday. Morning arrived with a mixture of rain and nervous energy. I arrived at Summit's headquarters 30 minutes early, giving myself time to center my thoughts before the meeting. To my surprise, Logan was already in the boardroom, reviewing documents alone. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. Melissa. Early as always. Some habits don't change, I replied, setting my briefcase on the table. An awkward silence followed, thick with unspoken history. Finally, Logan spoke. I suppose congratulations are in order. You've accomplished something remarkable. The acknowledgement seemed genuine, lacking the bitterness I had anticipated. Thank you, I said simply. He shuffled his papers, not meeting my eyes. I've been thinking about what you said at the emergency meeting, about Summit's financial position. You weren't entirely wrong. Coming from Logan, this was tantamount to a full concession. I waited, sensing he had more to say. The last few acquisitions, he continued, haven't performed as projected. We're carrying more debt than is comfortable. The board has been pressing for changes, even before your involvement. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. He finally looked up, his expression a mix of resignation and determination. Because despite what you might think, I care about this company. I built it from nothing. I don't want to see it torn apart in a power struggle. That's not my intention, I assured him. Then what is? Beyond the financial returns and strategic restructuring, what do you really want here, Melissa? It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself with increasing frequency. What did I want? Validation? Revenge? Or something more constructive? I want to prove that there's a better way, I said finally. Not just to you, but to the industry. Growth doesn't have to come at the expense of sustainability. Innovation doesn't require reckless risk-taking. I believe Summit can be more successful by being more responsible. Logan considered this, drumming, his fingers on the table. And my role in this vision of yours? That depends on you, I replied honestly. If you're willing to adapt, to consider different approaches, there's no reason we can't work together professionally. If not, I left the alternative unspoken. Before he could respond, other board members began arriving, and our private conversation ended. The meeting proceeded with the formality typical of corporate governance. I was officially welcomed as a representative of Summit's largest shareholder. 2 of my colleagues from Horizon were appointed to the board, shifting the balance of power, subtly but significantly. When the time came to present my proposals for Summit's restructuring, I felt all eyes on me, especially Logan's. I outlined a 3-phase plan. First, a comprehensive review of recent acquisitions to identify synergies and redundancies. Second, a renegotiation of the company's debt structure to improve terms and reduce immediate pressure. And third, a renewed focus on the company's core technologies, with increased R&D investment in areas showing the most promise. The goal, I explained, is not to dismantle what's been built, but to strengthen it. Summit has acquired incredible talent and technology. Now it needs the financial stability and strategic focus to leverage those assets effectively. To my surprise, Logan didn't object to any of my proposals. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about implementation timelines and resource allocation. The rest of the board engaged similarly, and by the end of the meeting, there was unanimous approval for moving forward with Phase 1 of the plan. As the meeting concluded, Robert Wilson, who remained board chair, pulled me aside. "I've been on many boards through many transitions," he said. "This could have been a bloodbath. Instead, you've managed to create alignment around a shared vision. That's rare and valuable." "It's early days," I cautioned. "The real test will come when we start making difficult decisions about redundancies and strategic pivots." "True," he acknowledged. "But you've set the right tone. Even Logan seems cautiously on board, which honestly, I didn't expect." Later that afternoon, as I prepared to leave Summit's offices, I ran into Bree near the elevator. I had successfully avoided any one-on-one interaction with her until now, and the encounter was as awkward as I had anticipated. "Congratulations on the acquisition," she said stiffly. "It's quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. There was no point in antagonizing her. Whatever had happened between her and Logan was separate from my professional objectives now. She hesitated, then added, "Logan's been different since the emergency board meeting. More reflective, less resistant to feedback. I think your presence has actually been good for him, professionally speaking." The admission clearly cost her something, and I appreciated the maturity it represented. "Change is rarely comfortable," I offered, "but sometimes it's necessary." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "Sometimes it is." The elevator arrived, and we rode down in companionable silence. As we parted in the lobby, Bree turned back. "Grace is a remarkable young woman. You've done an incredible job with her." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "She's the best of both of us, I think." Driving home that evening, I reflected on how differently the day had unfolded compared to my expectations. I had prepared for resistance, for conflict, for a power struggle with Logan that would require all my strategic skills to navigate. Instead, there had been a surprising level of acceptance, even collaboration. Was it possible that Logan had genuinely recognized the wisdom in my approach, or was he simply being pragmatic, adapting to a situation he couldn't control? Either way, the outcome was promising for Summit's future. Over the following months, our restructuring plan gained momentum. The comprehensive review of Summit's acquisitions revealed both problems and opportunities. Some units were underperforming due to insufficient resources or misalignment with Summit's core business. Others showed incredible potential, but had been hampered by aggressive revenue targets that prioritized short-term growth over sustainable development. Logan, to his credit, engaged constructively with the process. While he occasionally pushed back on specific recommendations, he acknowledged the underlying issues and supported the broader direction. In board meetings, we developed a professional dynamic that, while not exactly warm, was respectful and productive. 6 months after Horizon's acquisition, Summit announced its quarterly results, the first that fully reflected our restructuring efforts. Revenue was slightly down, as we had anticipated, but profitability had improved significantly. The company's debt-to-equity ratio had begun to improve, and analyst reports praised the new strategic direction. The day after the announcement, Logan asked to meet for coffee. We chose a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our respective offices. It was the first time we had met outside of Summit's headquarters since the acquisition. "The market's responding well to the changes," he said after we had settled with our drinks. "Our stock is up 11% since yesterday." "The analysts understand what we're trying to do," I agreed. "Short-term revenue dips for long-term stability." It's the right trade-off. Logan nodded, turning his coffee cup slowly. I've been thinking a lot about trade-offs lately, about the choices I've made over the years. I remained silent, sensing he needed to express something important. When we were married, he continued, I made the worst trade-off possible. I sacrificed our relationship, our family, for what I thought was necessary for Summit's success. I convinced myself that the company needed my single-minded focus, that anything less would lead to failure. Logan, I began, uncomfortable with the personal turn. Please, let me finish, he insisted gently. I'm not trying to reopen old wounds or make excuses. I just need to acknowledge something I should have recognized years ago. You were never just a housewife. Your contributions to our home, to raising Grace, were invaluable. And your business instincts were always sharp, sharper than mine in many ways. The admission hung between us, unexpected and powerful. For years, I had wanted him to recognize these truths. Now that he had, I wasn't sure how to respond. Why? Are you telling me this now? I asked finally. He met my gaze directly. Because you've proven me wrong in the most comprehensive way possible. Because Summit is stronger under your influence than it was under my exclusive control. And because Grace deserves parents who can acknowledge their mistakes and learn from them. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might realize. We spent the next hour talking not about Summit or our past, but about Grace, her interests, her challenges, her future. For the first time, in years we were simply co-parents sharing pride and concern for our daughter, without the weight of old resentments clouding the conversation. As we prepared to leave, Logan asked, was it worth it? Building Horizon, taking on Summit, all of it? I considered the question carefully. It wasn't the path I would have chosen originally, but yes, it was worth it. Not because it led me back to Summit or because it proved anything to you, but because it forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I had. He nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I'm glad it was you who stepped in when Summit was vulnerable. Anyone else might have dismantled what we built. You're making it better instead. Walking back to my car, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. The woman Logan had once dismissed as just a housewife had indeed taken control of his company through her investment firm. But the victory that mattered most wasn't financial or professional, it was personal. I had reclaimed not just my career, but my confidence, my purpose, and most importantly, my own narrative. The journey ahead would still have challenges. Summit's restructuring was far from complete, and navigating my new professional relationship with Logan would require ongoing care and attention. But for the first time, I felt free of the need to prove myself to him or anyone else. I had built something meaningful on my own terms, something that reflected my values and vision. As I drove home, I called Grace to check in on her day. Listening to her excited chatter about a science project, I smiled to myself. This moment of simple connection with my daughter, this life I had rebuilt from the ground up, this was the true measure of success. Not the acquisition of Summit, not the vindication of my business acumen, but the knowledge that I had emerged from adversity stronger and more authentic than before. The woman Logan had called just a housewife had become so much more, not despite that chapter of my life, but because of how I had chosen to write all the chapters that followed. 1 year after Horizon Partners acquired its stake in Summit Tech, I stood at the podium in the company's largest conference room, addressing employees about our annual results. The transformation had been more successful than even our most optimistic projections. Profitability had increased by 37%, debt had been reduced by over $40 million, and employee retention had improved dramatically. Today marks not just the end of a successful year, I told the assembled staff, but the beginning of Summit's next chapter. You've all been part of an incredible turnaround story, and the market has noticed. Summit's stock had risen steadily over the past 12 months, reflecting growing confidence in our restructuring strategy. The board had unanimously approved our Phase 3 initiatives, focusing on innovation and strategic growth in our core business areas. None of this would have been possible without your dedication and resilience, I continued, making eye contact with team members throughout the room. Change is never easy, but you've embraced it with professionalism and creativity. From the corner of my eye, I could see Logan standing to the side, watching attentively. Our working relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. After initially accepting the changes with reluctance, he had gradually become an advocate for our new direction, leveraging his deep knowledge of the company to help implement our strategies effectively. As I concluded my remarks and stepped away from the podium, Logan took my place to discuss specific departmental achievements. The transition was smooth, our leadership styles different but complementary. The employees, once anxious about the power dynamics between us, had grown accustomed to our professional partnership. Later that afternoon, the board convened for its quarterly meeting. The agenda included standard updates on operations and finances, but also a significant proposal: the creation of a new innovation division that would operate somewhat independently from Summit's main business units. Horizon Ventures would be funded initially with $30 million from Summit's improved cash reserves, I explained, outlining the concept. It would focus on emerging technologies that might not deliver immediate revenue but have significant long-term potential. Essentially, an internal incubator, Logan added, supporting the proposal. We've identified several promising projects already in development within our existing teams that would benefit from this structure. Robert Wilson, still serving as board chair, looked pleased by our united front. The fact that you two are bringing this forward together gives me confidence. It combines Melissa's focus on sustainable growth with Logan's strength in identifying breakthrough innovations. The proposal passed unanimously, and as the meeting adjourned, several board members commented on how effectively Logan and I had managed to set aside our history for the benefit of the company. What they didn't fully understand was that our collaboration wasn't just professional pragmatism, it was a genuine evolution in how we related to each other. Dinner to celebrate the Innovation Fund approval? Logan suggested as we gathered our materials. Grace is at a friend's sleepover tonight, so my evening is free. These occasional business dinners had become part of our new normal, professional, yet tinged with the familiarity that came from our shared history. I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Sure, the usual place? We had found a small restaurant, equidistant from both our homes, neutral territory where we could discuss Summit business without the formality of the office or the complicated emotions of more personal settings. Over dinner, our conversation drifted from Summit's future to Grace's upcoming college visits. At 14, she was already thinking about potential majors and universities, showing an interest in both business and engineering. She's got your analytical mind, Logan observed, a note of pride in his voice. And your determination. Last week, she spent 3 hours troubleshooting a coding problem for her computer science project. Wouldn't give up until she'd solved it. I smiled, recognizing the trait. She gets that from both of us, I think, for better or worse. Logan nodded, his expression turning reflective. Mostly for better, though I'm trying to teach her about balance too, something I never mastered myself. The comment hovered between us, laden with unspoken acknowledgments about the failures of our marriage. We had gradually become more comfortable referencing the past, though always carefully, always with an awareness of the boundaries we needed to maintain. I've been thinking, Logan said after a pause, redirecting the conversation to safer territory. We should consider bringing some of the talent from our Austin acquisition into the new innovation division. Their team has a different approach to problem solving that could be valuable. I had the same thought, I agreed. Especially Dr. Patterson's group. Their work on predictive analytics could apply across multiple projects. We spent the next hour discussing potential structures for Horizon Ventures, building on each other's ideas with a synchronicity that had once characterized our early relationship. It was strange how easily we could collaborate professionally despite everything that had happened between us personally. As we waited for dessert, Logan's expression grew serious. "There's something I need to discuss with you, outside of our summit work." I tensed slightly, uncertain of what might follow. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position at Northwestern Innovation Fund," he said, "as their managing director." The news caught me by surprise. Northwestern was a prestigious venture capital firm specializing in early-stage technological innovations, exactly the kind of work Logan excelled at. "That's significant," I managed, processing the implications. "Are you considering it seriously?" He nodded. "Very seriously. It would mean stepping down as Summit's CEO, though I could potentially remain on the board in a reduced capacity." "When would this happen?" I asked, my mind already racing through the potential impact on Summit, on our working relationship, on Grace. "They want an answer within 2 weeks, with a start date 3 months after that. Enough time for a proper transition at Summit." I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Logan leaving Summit would fundamentally alter the dynamic we had established over the past year. In many ways, our professional collaboration had helped heal some of the wounds from our personal history. What would happen to that progress if he left? "It's an incredible opportunity," I said finally. "The kind that doesn't come along often." "But?" he prompted, sensing my hesitation. "But Summit is stable now, not flourishing. The restructuring is working, but we're still in a critical phase. Your institutional knowledge is valuable." Logan studied me carefully. "Are those your only concerns? Professional ones?" The question pushed into territory we typically avoided. I considered deflecting, but opted for honesty instead. "No," I admitted. "I'm also thinking about what this means for how we manage co-parenting Grace. And yes, about what it means for the working relationship we've built." He nodded, seemingly appreciative of my candor. "I've been thinking about those things too. That's partly why I wanted to discuss this with you before making a decision. Despite our history, your opinion matters to me." The acknowledgement meant more than I wanted to admit. After years of feeling dismissed and undervalued by Logan, having him explicitly seek my input represented a profound shift. "I think you should take it," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Summit will manage the transition. We'll find a new CEO who aligns with our vision. And as for the rest, we'll figure it out." "We always do, for Grace's sake." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you. Your support means a lot." As we finished dinner and parted ways outside the restaurant, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically our lives had changed. 2 years ago, I had acquired a stake in Summit, partly to prove that Logan had been wrong about me. Now, I was encouraging him to pursue a new opportunity, confident in my ability to continue Summit's transformation without him. The next morning, I called an early meeting with Thomas and Jack to discuss succession planning. Logan hadn't made his decision official yet, but I wanted to be prepared. "If Logan leaves, we have several options," Thomas observed after I explained the situation. "We could promote from within. Jack Matthews in operations is highly respected and understands our new direction. Or we could bring in someone external who might add fresh perspective." "There's also the possibility of a co-CEO structure," Jack suggested. "It's becoming more common in tech, especially during transition periods." I considered both ideas. "Let's develop a short list for each scenario. And let's keep this confidential until Logan makes his decision official." Over the following days, I found myself increasingly convinced that Logan's departure, while challenging in the short term, might ultimately be positive for Summit. He would thrive in a role focused on innovation and early-stage investments, free from the operational responsibilities that had never been his strength. and Summit would benefit from leadership fully aligned with our sustainable growth strategy. When Logan called to tell me he had accepted Northwestern's offer, I was genuinely happy for him. "Congratulations," I said warmly. "It's the perfect role for you." "Thanks," he replied, sounding both excited and nervous. "I've already spoken with Robert about transition planning. He suggested you might step into an executive chairman role temporarily while we search for a new CEO. The suggestion took me by surprise. "Me? But I have Horizon to run." "The board trusts you," Logan said simply. "You understand Summit's operations now, and you've been the architect of our new strategy. It would just be for a few months while we find the right permanent replacement." I promised to consider it, though the idea of taking a more direct role at Summit was unexpected. My goal had always been to influence the company's direction through Horizon's position as majority shareholder, not to run it myself. That evening, as I helped Grace with her science project, a complex model of renewable energy systems, she asked about Logan's new job. "Dad told me he's leaving Summit," she said, carefully connecting solar panels to a small battery. "Will that be weird for you, since you're both there now?" Sometimes I forgot how perceptive she was, how attentive to the complex dynamics between her parents. "It's actually a really good opportunity for your dad," I explained. "And Summit will be fine. We've built a strong team." She nodded, focused on adjusting a miniature wind turbine. "He said you might become the boss there for a while. That would be kind of ironic, right? Since he used to say you should just stay home." The observation, delivered with teenage bluntness, made me pause. "Your dad and I have both changed a lot since then, Grace. We've learned from our mistakes." "I know," she said, looking up with a smile that reminded me so much of her younger self. "That's what makes it cool, not sad. Like, both of you figured out how to be better." Her simple wisdom struck me deeply. In Grace's eyes, the story of her parents wasn't just about past hurts or power dynamics, it was about growth and learning. Perhaps there was something profound in that perspective. The following week, after careful consideration and discussions with Horizon's leadership team, I agreed to serve as Summit's interim executive chair for 6 months while we conducted a thorough CEO search. The arrangement would require careful balancing of my responsibilities, but with Leah stepping up to handle more of Horizon's day-to-day operations, it seemed manageable. Logan's announcement to the Summit staff was met with mixed reactions. Concern about his departure balanced by his evident enthusiasm for his new role and reassurances about continuity under my temporary leadership. We presented a united front, emphasizing that the transition was planned and positive. As we wrapped up the all-hands meeting, Logan pulled me aside briefly. "You know, when you first acquired Eagle's stake in Summit, I was terrified you were going to dismantle everything I'd built." "That was never the plan," I reminded him. "I know that now," he acknowledged. "But what I've realized over the past year is that sometimes things need to be partially dismantled to be rebuilt better. Summit is stronger now than it ever was under my sole leadership. That's a hard truth to accept, but an important one." His humility surprised me. The Logan I had been married to would never have admitted such a thing. "It wasn't just me," I said. "It was the team we built together, the strategy we refined through collaboration. That's something neither of us could have done alone." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that you were right and I was wrong, or that I underestimated you, though I certainly did. But that we're both better as leaders when we're open to different perspectives." As he walked away to speak with other team members, I considered his words. The journey that had brought me to this moment, from dismissed housewife to investment, firm founder to executive chair of Summit Tech, had never really been about proving Logan wrong. It had been about discovering what I was capable of when freed from other people's limited perceptions. And in an unexpected way, Logan's journey had paralleled mine. He had evolved from the dismissive husband who couldn't see my value beyond traditional roles to a colleague who respected my business acumen and leadership. We had both been transformed by the very conflict that once divided us. Later that day, as I settled into what would temporarily be my office at Summit, I found a small package on the desk with a note from Logan. "For the new chapter," the note read. Inside was a beautiful fountain pen and a journal bound in soft leather. The first page of the journal contained a handwritten message. "Melissa, Summit's story has many chapters left to write. Some of the most important ones will be authored by you. Thank you for seeing the potential in this company when I had lost my way, and for finding a path forward that honors what's best about what we built, while courageously changing what needed to change. The woman I once dismissed as just a housewife has become the leader Summit needs. I'm grateful our story took this unexpected turn. Logan." I ran my fingers over the words, feeling the impression of the pen on the paper. There was no romance. In his message, no hint of rekindling what had been lost. Instead, there was something perhaps more valuable: genuine respect and acknowledgement. Setting the journal aside, I turned to my computer and opened the strategic plan we had developed. For Summit's next phase, there was still so much work to do, so many opportunities to pursue. The company that had once been the catalyst for my divorce had become the unexpected vehicle for my professional fulfillment and personal growth. Life's ironies, I was learning, often contained its deepest lessons. The journey that had begun with pain and dismissal had led to empowerment and new beginnings, not just for me but for everyone involved. And that was a story worth telling, a legacy worth building, and a future worth embracing. The view from Summit Tech's new headquarters was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the river winding through the urban landscape like a silver ribbon. I stood at the glass, watching the sunset paint the buildings in shades of gold and pink. A moment of quiet reflection before the evening's festivities began. "Mom? They're ready for us downstairs." Grace's voice pulled me from my thoughts. At 19, she was a striking young woman, poised and confident in her formal dress. She'd come home from her freshman year at MIT specifically for this event, the 5th anniversary of Summit's restructuring and the official opening of our new innovation campus. "You look beautiful," I said, smiling at my daughter. "Ready to face the cameras?" She rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "As ready as I'll ever be. Dad just texted. His flight landed and he's on his way from the airport." "Perfect timing," I replied, gathering my notes for the evening's speech. The journey to this moment had been remarkable. The 6 months I had agreed to serve as Summit's interim executive chair had stretched to a year as our CEO search extended longer than anticipated. During that time, I had grown increasingly involved in Summit's operations, finding unexpected fulfillment in directly implementing the vision I had initially shaped as an investor. When the board finally identified the perfect candidate, a brilliant operations executive named Thomas Reynolds, I had helped with his transition before stepping back into my role at Horizon. But my deeper connection with Summit remained, with Horizon maintaining its position as the company's largest shareholder and me continuing to serve on the board. Logan had thrived in his new role at Northwestern Innovation Fund, leveraging his talent for identifying breakthrough technologies and supporting visionary founders. He remained on Summit's board as well, his institutional knowledge and external perspective proving valuable during quarterly meetings. Our professional relationship had settled into something neither of us could have predicted, a genuine collaboration built on mutual respect and shared goals. The bitterness of our divorce had gradually faded, replaced by a functional partnership, focused primarily on Grace's well-being and secondarily on Summit's continued success. "There's Dad," Grace said as we entered the reception area. Logan was just arriving, engaged in animated conversation with Paulo Rivera, who had remained one of our key investment partners throughout Summit's transformation. Logan looked up and waved, excusing himself to join us. "Sorry about cutting it close," he said, giving Grace a quick hug. The connecting flight was delayed. "You're just in time," I assured him. "The ceremony doesn't start for another 20 minutes. As we made our way to the event space, I marveled at how comfortably we moved as a unit, not a family in the traditional sense anymore, but bound by something just as meaningful. Shared history, mutual respect, and genuine goodwill. The celebration was a testament to how far Summit had come. Over 500 people had gathered: employees, investors, industry partners, and media. Under Thomas's leadership and with our continued strategic guidance, Summit had evolved into a model of sustainable growth in the tech sector. Profitability had increased year over year, employee satisfaction scores ranked among the highest in the industry, and our innovation division had spun off 3 successful ventures already. As I took the podium to deliver my remarks as board chair, I looked out at the assembled crowd, spotting many familiar faces. Leah Thompson sat near the front, having become one of my closest friends and advisors. Jack Matthews, now Summit's COO, was chatting with several team members. Bree had moved on years ago, accepting a position with a marketing firm in Chicago, but we had maintained cordial relations during professional crossovers. 5 years ago, I began, Summit Tech stood at a crossroads. The company had achieved remarkable growth but faced significant challenges. Today, we celebrate not just survival, but transformation. Summit is now a leader not only in technological innovation, but in corporate responsibility, sustainable growth, and inclusive leadership. I acknowledged the contributions of everyone who had been part of the journey: the employees who had embraced change, the investors who had maintained faith in our vision, and the leadership team that had executed that vision with skill and determination. Special recognition must go to Logan Mitchell, Summit's founder, I continued, nodding toward where he sat beside Grace. His original vision created the foundation upon which we've built, and to Thomas Reynolds, whose leadership, over the past 4 years, has taken Summit to new heights. The speech continued with updates on our latest innovations and future plans, but my focus kept returning to how this moment encapsulated my own journey. From dismissed housewife to respected business leader, from bitter ex-wife to collaborative colleague. The path had been unexpected, but ultimately rewarding in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first set out to prove myself. At the reception following the ceremony, I found myself standing beside Logan at the refreshment table, both of us taking a brief moment away from the constant congratulations and conversations. "Remember when you first told me about Horizon?" he asked, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. I was so dismissive, so certain I knew better. I smiled, remembering the dining room table covered with my research, his casual dismissal of my efforts. "You were quite confident." "I was an idiot," he corrected, shaking his head. "But you know what's strange? In a roundabout way, my biggest mistake led to the best outcome for Summit. If I had listened to you then, supported your ideas, we might have made safer investments, achieved moderate success. But we wouldn't be here." He gestured to the innovation campus around us. "Life rarely follows a linear path," I agreed, "especially the important journeys." "Mom!" Grace appeared suddenly, excitement radiating from her. "Professor Landry is here, from the MIT Media Lab. Can I introduce you?" "Of course," I replied, pleased by her enthusiasm. As Grace led me across the room toward her professor, I glanced back at Logan, who gave me an encouraging nod. The moment captured the essence of where we had all arrived, supporting each other's paths while maintaining our distinct identities and pursuits. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, I found myself back at the windows, gazing at the city now illuminated by countless lights. Summit's new headquarters stood as a physical manifestation of everything we had built. Not just a successful company, but a new way of approaching business and relationships. "Penny for your thoughts?" Leah's voice interrupted my reflection as she joined me at the window. "Just taking it all in," I replied. Sometimes I still can't believe how everything unfolded. She smiled knowingly. When you first pitched the summit acquisition to me, I thought you were at least partially motivated by revenge. I wasn't wrong, was I? I laughed softly. No, you weren't wrong. Proving Logan wrong was definitely part of it. But somewhere along the way, the motivation changed. That's the difference between success and true fulfillment, she observed. The former can come from external validation, but the latter requires something deeper. Her words resonated with the realization I had come to gradually over the years. The victory that had initially seemed most important, showing Logan that I was more than just a housewife, had ultimately been just the beginning of a much more meaningful journey. The true achievement wasn't in proving him wrong, but in discovering who I could become when freed from the limitations others had placed on me, and eventually, from the limitations I had placed on myself. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the decade that had transformed my life. The divorce that had once seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The desire for vindication that had initially fueled me had evolved into something far more sustaining: purpose, confidence, and genuine impact. And perhaps most surprisingly, the relationship that had been broken beyond repair had been forged into something new. Not a marriage, but a different kind of partnership built on hard-earned respect and shared values. The woman who had once been called just a housewife had become a business leader, an investor, a mentor, and a board chair. But more importantly, she had become fully herself, defined not by her relationship to others, but by her own choices, values, and vision. As I pulled into my driveway, I smiled at the thought of tomorrow's breakfast with Grace before she returned to school. Life continued to evolve, relationships continued to change, but the foundation I had built, both professionally and personally, was strong enough to support whatever came next. The journey hadn't been what I expected, but it had led exactly where I needed to go. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.